I want to thank you for joining me again as we continue on with our series, From Other to One Another, our daily devotional series that accompanying our Sunday morning sermon series. I want to thank you for joining us for that as we explore the richness of our relationships with one another. Sometimes understanding words can be difficult in Scripture. One of those instances is when a word is used like encourage one another, where Paul uses that twice in 1 Thessalonians. At the end of chapter 4, he says encourage each other with these words. At the end of chapter 5, he returns again to encourage one another with these words. Encourage one another and build each other up with these words. But in the particular context, what does he mean by that? And I think that becomes where context again becomes very important in understanding particular words. What's happened in chapter 4 is that Paul is talking to those who are distraught because their loved ones have passed away, and they're not sure that if Jesus returns, what's going to happen with them. Some of them have become convinced that when Jesus returns, those who have died will be left behind. And Paul, in the midst of that context, says, no, they won't be left behind. What will happen is they'll actually beat us into God's presence, into Christ's presence. So don't be concerned. Don't be distraught. Be comforted. The better translation there, rather than encourage one another, would probably be the term to comfort one another. In chapter 5, he's talking about encouraging one another with these words. He's talking just previous about that, about, well, what about those of you who are still living? How ought you to be living in light of Christ's return? And he's telling them that they need to be living a life that is holy and pleasing to God, one that honors God and seeks to, in light of the life that God is calling us to in eternity, we live that life now. And he says, encourage one another with these words. Now there he's not telling them to comfort one another. There he's telling them to push each other, urge each other to live a life that honors God. We are called sometimes to comfort one another. In 1987, my grandmother passed away, and in some ways my grandmother was as much of a mother or more of a mother to me than my mother herself was. My grandmother was the one who encouraged me in the ministry, and she was the one that played baseball with me when I was a child, and go out and play catch into just almost 60 years old. She would still go out and play baseball with me. It was very close to her, and no death that has ever occurred around me has hit me as strong as hers. We were living in Athens, Illinois at the time, and Grandma and Grandpa lived in Rock Falls, about 150 miles away. And the day of the funeral, Lara and I had driven up to be with the family, and we get to the funeral home and walk into the funeral home and look back, and there are two families from the church that we were serving in Athens, Illinois, who were there for the funeral. Why are they there? Because they knew my heart was troubled. They knew I was going through some grief, and they wanted to be there to comfort, to bring comfort to me in the midst of difficulty. Bringing comfort doesn't mean you have the magic words. It doesn't mean that you are there to miraculously make someone feel better. It's that you're there. And that you encourage one another. You comfort one another with your presence and with your words. The words simply may be, I want you to know we're here. But it lifts those up from times of discouragement, times of grief, times of despair, and breathes hope back into an otherwise maybe hopeless existence. Encourage one another, comfort one another with these words.